Alô, boa noite. Boa tarde. Eu já estou em outro ritmo já. Bom, bem-vindos todos e todas para o terceiro e último dia da jornada com o professor Sebastian Scheerer. Hoje o professor vai falar sobre política de drogas. Para a gente vai ser um dia muito produtivo, que é um dos temas que ele domina com mais qualidade e que ele apresenta com mais didatismo. Então, para a gente a gente vai terminar essa jornada com chave de ouro. E antes de passar a palavra para o professor Sebastian, a gente tinha ontem ficado de abrir o dia de hoje com algumas perguntas que, em função do tempo, não puderam ser realizadas. Então, se alguém de ontem para hoje manteve essas questões, essas perguntas e quiser colocar para o professor Sebastian agora, antes dele começar a fala dele, agora é o momento. Alguém ali? Pode falar.
Good afternoon, Professor. So, yesterday you said that if we abolish the minimum amount of penalty that the law imposes, we can finish the mass incarceration. But I didn't understand exactly the relation between those two positions.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a little clumsy, unfortunately, with these machines. Otherwise, I could show some documents. Sentencing guidelines, for instance. Since the 1970s, very many things have changed in the United States, which is the paramount power, also with strong influences everywhere. Things have changed in the theory of punishment and in the make-up of experts and panels and in the judiciary and in public opinion. And the result was that people were unsatisfied with what they thought was that the judges were too lenient. They were not handing out sentences that were adequate to the crime. And when they were handing out sentences that were longer, then people thought, well, it's unfair. The judge said 10 years, but the guy is out of prison after 5 years because of good behavior and others. So he is making time. And that was seen as unfair and untruthful. And so there was a movement that was called truth in sentencing. And that meant when you get 10 years, you stay 10 years. And that is different from the usual things to have. And so they passed legislation that was supposed to bring truth to sentencing. And another thing was proportionality. The sentence should be proportional to the crime. That is a very old thought, of course. That is biblical and very, very old. But it is also a thought that had been propagated by German idealist philosophy in the late 18th century, especially Immanuel Kant and his theory of punishment in the first chapters before the metaphysics of morals. And there he stresses proportionality. And so people like Andrew van Hirsch and others, they said we have to go back to Kant and we have to be stricter and proportional and truthful, etc. And then this was translated in sentencing guidelines that were pieces of paper which said when you have a robbery, you have at least 2 years or at least 5 years. The second time you have at least 7 years. And the third time at least 25 years. And if you have been drunk, then it's maybe 2 years less or 2 years more or something like this. And they had a whole catalog, and it's like this, like an Excel sort of thing. And you have the crime, the month, you have attenuating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and it's just like mathematics. And you say, well, yeah, this is exactly 135 months. And then you go to 135 months, and you go to the next list, and then it says, when you get 135 months, then you can only get probation, or you can be let out early, so and so many, 12.5 months early. But you can get up to 120 months more for bad behavior at present. So you have these mathematic things. And minimum sentences mean for the first robbery you have at least, let's say, 5 years. For the second robbery at least 10 years, and for the third at least 25 years, or at least life. That's the famous 3 strikes and you are out legislation that comes from baseball. And in this context it means 3 felonies, 3 crimes that you commit, and the third crime will be the last crime you commit outside of prison, because you will stay there forever. And that was a California legislation. And other legislations followed. And those areas that were especially affected were things like robbery, but even more so drug trafficking. Drug traffickers were seen as the worst kind of people, and maybe you have heard that about 3 weeks ago, President Trump was publicly campaigning for the death sentence for traffickers. He said, I don't understand, if you kill 1 or 2 persons, you get the death penalty. But a drug dealer who kills 2,000 or 3,000 people during his lifetime, he just sits in prison. How can that be? This is why he was so good friends with the Philippine president, Rodrigo Duterte, who actually does kill these people, and who has been elected on the promise of eliminating. His promise during his campaign was that in the first month of his reign, after being elected, he would kill 100,000 criminals with the help of organized gangs, because of course he himself could not do it all, and the police couldn't do it all. But he would then ask the gangs to help him to eliminate these people. Of course that is far from what he did, but he did make it to, well, I think Human Rights Watch is talking about 7,000 people who have been extra-legally executed, and oftentimes they had wrapped these package wrapping things around them and put a cardboard and saying dealer or user or something. And they say, well, like this, we tell the police they don't have to investigate, everything's okay. So that's quite a step forward into barbarism from what you could call a normal state. Yeah, and so, the higher you put the minimum sentence, the longer people stay in prison. And for prison overcrowding, it makes a big difference how long people stay in prison. If everybody only stays 1 year, then the prisons will not be overcrowded. But if you have 50,000 or 70,000 people with life sentences, and maybe you have 5,000 who are waiting on death row, and maybe also wait for a long time, and then you have maybe 100,000 who have sentences of 20 years or 25 years or 30 years. That will, every year these people with these sentences come and add up to them, and then you have overcrowding. But that was a very long answer to the short. Sorry.
Mais alguma pergunta?
Otávio, posso perguntar em português?
Pode.
Não, eu queria só fazer mais uma pergunta sobre o debate que encerrou o encontro de ontem, sobre um confinamento necessário para determinados casos. Essa ideia de um confinamento que não passe pela punição, pelo sistema de justiça criminal, então seria a lógica da saúde e da psiquiatria regendo essa ideia desse confinamento? Porque eu estudo os hospitais de custódia, que são instituições mistas entre a lógica penal e a lógica médica. E eu queria entender se essa ideia de confinamento necessário que o senhor está trabalhando iria para esse campo.
Não necessariamente. A ideia básica é de defesa social, e essa escola da defesa social, que hoje em dia é mais associada com Marc Ancel, I don't know, Luke Hülsmann, he was sort of referring to Marc Ancel and this school of défense sociale. I must admit that for me this is just an expression, and I have not really done much research into the school of défense sociale. I'm very skeptical. It also goes back in German jurisprudence and criminology to Franz von Liszt, who was a famous penal reformer in the late 19th century and early 20th century, one of the founders of the internationale kriminalistische Vereinigung, Association Internationale Kriminalistique, no say. And that was an international association of quite some influence at that time with Belgian, Dutch, French members, and they were all trying to get over this stupid old revenge penal law things. And there were many people who really were for abolishing penal law and replacing it by a simple defense law that would only obey to the necessities of society to protect against really dangerous people. But that did not catch on. What they really invented, the whole story of the German measures, the right of measures. I don't know if you're acquainted with the German penal law or if you have something similar in Brazilian penal law. In Germany, they are speaking of the so-called two paths, not in the sense of Terry Moffat for the criminologists among you, who has also a two-path theory of crime, but they are speaking of two paths in the sense that in Germany, a delinquent, he can be punished when he's guilty to imprisonment, but he can be sentenced when he is only guilty in a reduced extent or not guilty to a kind of imprisonment in a prison, but it's not called a punishment, it's called a measure for security and safety. And this was really what Franz von Liszt had wanted to replace the penal code with. He said we can abolish the penal code and we replace it with a code of measures of protection. And then in November 1933, when Hitler had already been installed as Chancellor in Germany, he said, well, we need both. We need punishment and we need these measures. And ever since November 1933, Germany has both. They have punishment and measures. And it had been invented by theorists as a substitute for punishment. And now they say, well, we just add it, which is about the worst solution can happen. So it makes it very difficult to propagate such a system today when you have all this historical stuff. When I think of confinement for security reasons, I think not of putting people in a psychiatric institution and not in a prison. I think of having things that look like the resort prison from yesterday. Because you ask from these people a sacrifice. You ask them to sacrifice their liberty, and you take it away from them, not to punish them, but because you don't know how you can protect society against them. If you may excuse this analogy, but if I like these sweet little lions and panthers, and I have a sweet little lion at home, when he grows up, I will have to put him in a cage, probably. Otherwise he might eat me up. I don't do it to punish him. I don't do it because I don't like him. I do it because I have to protect myself. And then, of course, as somebody who likes lions, I would not put him in a small, terrible cage like a prison cell. Why should I be so cruel to him? I will put him in a large zoo-like thing where he has mountains and rivers and trees, so he can live like a lion. And why should I put a human being into a prison cell? I mean, why should I be so cruel? The human being should be able to live like a human being, especially if I take his freedom away just for my own sake and not because I want to do something bad to him.
Acho que a gente já pode começar, senão vai atrasar muito.
Sim, verdade. Yeah, thank you, Renato, for taking up this work. Very nice of you. And thank you for coming back, even though it's the last day. And I'm very happy to see you again here. It's been very nice. And I will just tell you what I think is important about these questions. And this morning, I renamed, oh, by the way, Mayera, is that you?
Yeah.
Oh, you are Mayera. You were the one with the slavery tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I promised you I would change the article,
Very nice.
the prison article, and I have started this morning to change it a little bit, and I will continue later when I have more time. But I already started.
We talked about it yesterday during beer also, the conversation.
Yeah, good. And also, the article in Crimpedia about drugs has also changed a little bit. I changed it this morning, and now it's not called drugs anymore. It's now called Social and Legal Limits of Drug Law Reform, because I had a conversation with Tamiris last night, and we were talking about the social obstacles. Why is it so difficult to get a drug law reform? And so I think these are very central questions, and if we solve these questions, then we can make some progress in getting a society that has a more rational way of dealing with drugs, and that would be good for many people who would survive who otherwise don't survive. Today, the war on drugs and drugs together, they claim a lot of lives and destroy a lot of families and states also. So, as a matter of fact, we have seen in our prison session that you always find drugs when you ask the question, why is it that the prison population is now more than 10 million? And when you ask for these extreme homicide rates, you always fall on drugs. Sooner or later, if you're not completely blind, you see drugs have a lot of things to do with it. So, contrary to what we learn at university in law studies, as far as I know, at least in my country, drug law is not a central piece of legal education and legal training. When you're at university, you have the whole normal stuff, but drug law is something of less importance. In the real world, the drug law is a central thing. For the police, for the prisons, for lawyers, for public prosecutors, and especially for those caught in the web of anti-drug legislation. So I think it's a central thing, and I've been thinking about this topic for a long time now. And some questions really are bugging me, and I want to tell you what these questions are. Most of them are very little known and very important at the same time. So maybe it's worth talking about it. No, I will not talk about 3 ways of looking at drug control. That is nice, but it's not so important. I will only shortly talk about types of casualties. Because, of course, everybody knows, drugs create pleasure for many people, and they can also be good for medical treatment, but they also create harm. That is trivial. Everybody knows. Now, what kind of harm? I think it's more or less 6 types of harm. You can overdose yourself or have another kind of drug accident, and that is harm to self. Then you can harm others under the influence of drugs. Drunk driving is one of these problems. You can run over pedestrians, kill people because you're drunk, but you can also do that with other drugs, of course. Or you can kill a family member. Many people under the influence of alcohol, Friday, Saturday, even Sunday are the most relevant days for that. They kill people in bars, or they kill people at home, or they kill people with whom they have other kinds of relationships. And that's a lot of people who die because of drugs. Then, of course, a family that has a drug user among them, any family that has an alcoholic as a family member or a crack user knows what that means. That is not funny. And then there are the costs to the public sector. The health system costs a lot in terms of how do we treat all these people, the welfare system, the police, the prisons. So the public sector suffers a lot in terms of financial damages. Then there is harm inflicted on drug market actors by officials. Officials are, for instance, police, especially police, but also prison guards. And these actors, they inflict harm because they arrest people, that is harm. They put people in prison, that is harm. When you are in prison, then there is type of casualties number 6, harm inflicted on drug market actors by non- or pseudo-official actors like gangs or militias. Many people who go to prison because of drug questions, they are being stabbed in prison, they are being killed. For many people, to be sent to prison under specific circumstances is a kind of a death sentence. For instance, when you are a big trafficker and you got a lot of cocaine from an even bigger trafficker, and you get busted and you don't pay what you bought, then you go to prison, then it might well be that the bigger person sends people in prison to kill. Every now and then I see news on television, this and this guy arrested for drug charges, still pre-trial, stabbed 27 facadas. And you know, that is not a personal thing, that had something to do with serious business questions. Okay. Now it depends really on what you think is the most relevant. Many people believe that the enormous harm done by drugs themselves and by drug addicts is the real big question. And this is the reason why we have to prohibit drugs, and we have to prevent the production of drugs and the trade in drugs. That is essential. If we make it that illegal drugs are not grown anymore, no coca trees, no marijuana growing, if there are no drugs, then people cannot be addicted to drugs. And when they cannot be addicted to drugs, they cannot do bad things under the influence of drugs. And families will not have the problem of drug addicts. Their children will be safe because they can be addicted to video games, but not to drugs anymore. And whoever has a crack-addicted child would say, yeah, okay, better video game addicted than drug addicted. And I would agree. So that is the idea that the dangers of the drugs are so great that we have to prohibit drugs and eradicate, eliminate drugs. The growing of them, the production of them, and the selling of them. That was, of course, the idea of alcohol prohibition in the United States. That was a great experiment. It was called the Noble Experiment. And it failed. That lasted from 1919 to 1933. And the idea was really, we eliminate the production of alcohol, we eliminate the transportation, the importation of alcohol, and then there will be no alcohol in the United States, and the families will not have the problem that the man is going out to the bar and he comes back drunk, hits the wife and children, and ruins the family finances. So we can really have a social hygiene, we can have a healthy social life without alcohol. That was the idea, of course, mostly of Protestant churches and of the first women's movement. One important movement in this context was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. They were the most important social movement at that time, and it was a good social movement because it has also fought the same people in other contexts, the same women, had also been in the movement to abolish slavery. They were abolitionists, and they were also caring for other social problems, and later on they were also working for voting rights for women, etc. It was an emancipation movement, and also they wanted to clean the society of this terrible vice of alcohol. So that's the idea, and the same idea applies today to illegal drugs. As a matter of fact, the prohibition of illegal drugs was already a project at the time of the alcohol prohibition in the United States during these 1920s. In the 1920s, there was an idea of combining the American alcohol prohibition and an international drug prohibition. The idea was, let's put the two things together, but that didn't work because other countries, especially Spain, Italy, they said, well, you want to prohibit alcohol also and then prohibit everything. That was unimaginable. And so that did not work. But what did work was an international prohibition system for illegal drugs. And people who are focusing on society and on the health of society and on the well-being of their children, they say, of course it's a good idea to prohibit illegal drugs because we want to save our families. That is completely normal to want that. Now, some other people they say that might be a very good idea to keep your family free from illegal drugs. But it is a big difference if we say this is our lifestyle and we want to do this as a lifestyle, for instance, because we are Protestants, and we can also talk with other people and tell them maybe it's good for your family too to be abstinent from illegal drugs. Or if you say, well, we make a criminal law and anybody who takes an illegal drug will be sent to prison, that is a big difference, because you will always have a lot of people who will take these drugs, and then you will have a lot of people in prison. And then prohibitionists say, well, this is why we want to eradicate the cultivation. If you have no cultivation of coca, then you don't have cocaine. And these people are still fighting. Some say we could solve the drug problem if we just invest more energy and if we have higher sentences for drug cultivation, drug traffic, and drug consumption. Maybe we can still get there, and then society will be clean, prisons will be empty, because there will be no drugs anymore. That is the hope. And then there are people who say, well, we have seen it with alcohol prohibition in the States. That was a catastrophic experience. We have seen it now for 100 years with illegal drugs in the world. And prisons are filled. There is enough cocaine, there's enough methamphetamine, there's enough everything, in spite of the war on drugs. So the costs of the war on drugs are much higher even than the costs of drugs themselves for families. And now what this is the second type of person. The first type says, let's have prohibition, one day we will get it done. And the other type of person says, no, this is not the right way. The right way would be to understand that prohibition makes it worse, to end prohibition, and to invent something new. These are the two big movements or convictions. And this, in society, in universities, I think, is a majority of people would say there is enough data to prove that prohibition has not worked and that it cannot work. And this is why we have to reform the drug laws. But in the population, I'm afraid, 67.5% would say, no, it should still be forbidden because I want to protect my children. And somehow people think they protect their children by prohibition. And I want to, first of all, I want to give you an interesting literature. Dan Werb, that if you just Werb like this, W-E-R-B, Daniel, Dan Werb and about 50 collaborators. In 2013, they published a very important paper in the British Medical Journal, BMJ, British Medical Journal, 2013, Dan Werb and others. You can find